Alright, so full disclosure, originally this video was not just going to be, affordable games for the new Steam Deck owner, but rather I was going to take a kind of a weird approach where I was going to say, okay, what are the most valuable games, or I guess what's the most bang for the buck you could get if you only had like $50 to spend from like a Steam gift card or something like that. However, I opted not to do that because, well, frankly, it was really, really hard. So maybe I'll do that video at some point in the future, but as it stands, there were just so many great games that I've played on the Steam Deck so far that I really didn't want to limit myself and leave a couple of them out. So that's all what today's video is all about, just going over about, I think 7 or 8 different games that I would definitely recommend if you're a new Steam Deck owner and you're looking to find a really good experience, but something that's not going to break the bank necessarily. So you're not going to find a ton of like new release AAAs that are like $50 or $60 on the list. Rather, you're going to find stuff that's closer in the like, $5 to $20 range here. So all that being said, I'm going to try to go, generally speaking, from more cheap or more affordable fare up to stuff that's a little bit more pricey. And let's just go ahead and start with, what's, cheaper than free, and that would be Aperture Desk Job. Now, for starters, Aperture Desk Job is not a very long game. In fact, it's kind of not even fair to call it a game. It's more of like a 15-minute experience, but it's a really great 15 minutes or so because that classic Portal humor is still on display in a big way. It's a great looking game, again, despite its short length. And then on top of that, the thing that I really like about it is it kind of pulls double duty, not just as kind of like a fun, free inclusion for new Steam Deck owners, but then also it does have the added benefit of getting you familiar with the Steam Deck's capabilities and button layout, because what it does is it sort of walks you through some of the most common buttons that you would use on the system, as well as a light overview of some of the features that it has, things like taking screenshots, for example, or the fact that it has microphones that can record your voice and things like that. And I'm not going to talk at any great length about what the game's actually about, because I feel like to even speak about it lightly would kind of spoil a lot of the fun to be had from just firing it up for the first time. So I'm really not going to talk about it much because it's a very, very short experience, but I promise it's one that's well worth your time. And honestly, probably one of my favorite inclusions with the new system launch. Again, it's not, strictly speaking, just preloaded on the system or anything like that. You have to actually go download and install it. But again, it is free. And as far as like, launch titles to sort of introduce you to a system go, it's pretty good. I wouldn't say it's quite on par with something like Astra's Playroom for the PlayStation 5 or anything like that, but still, it's a fun, quirky little time that definitely has Valve's sense of humor written all over it, and again, it does do a good job of familiarizing you with some of the things that your Steam Deck can do. Next up, for only $2.99, this might be one of the most bang for the buck games that I've ever seen, and that is Vampire Survivors. Now, it's only $2.99, and I think that's because it's an early access title right now, and historically speaking, I don't have a lot of experience with early access titles, probably because I've predominantly been a console gamer, and early access titles are more of a PC gaming thing. But I heard so many people raving about this title, and I was really skeptical about it because I'd seen some screenshots, I'd seen a couple of articles pop up online, I was like, okay, I guess it looks kind of neat, but what's the big deal? I mean, it looks like any top-down, pixel-based kind of shooter action game that I've seen. But then I went ahead and took the leap because, again, it's only like $3, right? So why not roll the dice and see what happens? And wow, it is an incredibly fun game, and it's sort of incredible that not only is it this fun for extended periods of time with just tremendous replay value, but it manages to accomplish all of this where the only control you have is the left analog stick. Now, to be fair, there are a few button presses, right? Because whenever you first start up a run to go against these just hordes of nightmarish undead, you get to choose things like your character or exactly what stage you're going to go to depending on what you've unlocked so far. But as early access titles go in my limited experience, this has to be one of the best ones. And I am just completely shocked that this really just very simply presented game has tons and tons of replay value. There are just a ridiculous amount of screen-filling encounters to contend with as you continue to level up your character, unlock new weapons and gear, and I love that they've created this very simple, very elegant way for the action to play out where, again, all you have to do is move your character around, but that shouldn't suggest that there's no strategy to it. There's a ton of strategy to this game, because every time you unlock a new weapon, whether that's holy water or throwing knives or a whip or whatever it is, you sort of start to get a feel for how often those attacks actually branch out, or what ability is going to be best suited to which situations, depending on what the level layout's like and what kind of enemies you'll encounter and what direction they're going to be coming from. So yeah, if you're looking for anything to play that's not going to break the bank by any stretch of the imagination, I would highly recommend you check out Vampire Survivors. It's just, it's way better than the sum of its parts is the best way that I could put it. And if you're looking for, something that has at least a light dusting of Castlevania, you'll definitely find it here. Yeah, I can't say enough good things about this. I'm so glad that I decided to jump in and mess around with this because it's so fun to just jump in and do a quick run for 10 to 20 minutes, then bounce out. So yeah, I think Vampire Survivors is a crazy good deal at $2.99. And speaking of battling the undead at an affordable price, let's just go ahead and go back in time a little bit, about 13 years I'd say, because this is a classic that still very much holds up, and that would be Left 4 Dead 2. I mean, what can you really say about Left 4 Dead 2 that hasn't already been said, right? I mean, it is a fantastically fun 4-player zombie co-op game. If you're not familiar, essentially the premise is you have a number of episodes that you can work through with up to 3 friends, and throughout those journeys you basically end up working your way towards different safe houses, gradually getting different loadouts and gear that will help you push back these hordes of the undead. There are special zombies that you will have to contend with here and there, and it has a devilishly smart AI director that makes sure to raise and lower the pressure on the player appropriately depending on how efficiently that you're playing. Admittedly, so far I've only played it a little bit on the Steam Deck, but it is exactly as I remember when I used to play it on the 360, I believe, and now the fact that I can just sort of play this in handheld format and just do a couple of quick runs with some randos online is a whole lot of fun. And again, fairly budget title, right? It's $9.99, so you're not going to spend a ton for the privilege, but what you will get is a ton of replayability out of it because every time it plays a little bit differently given the procedurally generated nature of the hordes of zombies that you have to contend with. You know, if you're somebody who's in the mood to just blast a bunch of zombies with some frenetic 4-player action. Next up for $14.99 is Death Road to Canada. Because if you're looking for a more nostalgic sort of survival battle against hordes of the undead, I think Death Road to Canada is a good choice because maybe you played a game called The Oregon Trail, and if you're as old as I am, possibly back on an Apple II. And as somebody who has not played Oregon Trail in a very long time, that's essentially what Death Road to Canada is if you just, you know, again, replace the Oregon Trail itself with a mad dash north of Canada so that you can escape these zombie hordes here in the US. And it has a sort of adorable, almost chibi art style to it, which I really appreciate it, but the gameplay is pretty straightforward. Essentially, if you've ever played the Oregon Trail, it will feel very familiar. Most of the time you will be doing things like, you know, gathering supplies, or food, or attending to medical care for the other people that are in your party that you pick up along the way. And then periodically you'll be presented with decisions where maybe you have to chance it and camp overnight with a bunch of survivors who you don't know, which carries its own sort of danger where you might lose supplies overnight and get robbed. Or it might be that you have to make a decision of what area you're going to go to try to gather those supplies. So you might stop temporarily to raid a hardware store, or you might find like an abandoned school or something like that, where your job is to get in, gauge how aggressive the zombies around you are, deal with them where you can, and ultimately survive long enough to grab supplies that will propel you on your journey north to Canada. It's a sort of cutesy take on the zombie survival genre, but ultimately just endlessly challenging, endlessly charming, and I think it's a really great pick for $14.99. And speaking of games that are $14.99 in that extremely challenging range, it's hard not to recommend Hollow Knight. Now, to be fair, Hollow Knight's been on all kinds of systems at this point, but I think it looks particularly good on the larger screen of the Steam Deck. And like Death Road to Canada, it's also endlessly charming and has a really cutesy visual style, although I will say it's decidedly darker in its presentation, certainly more somber in tone. But if you're looking for a Soulsian-like challenge, you know, you're definitely going to find it in Hollow Knight. It is not an easy game, but if you have a Metroidvania sort of itch that you're looking to scratch, you can do a lot worse than playing Hollow Knight. I myself have not beaten this yet. Now, I have beaten harder games than Hollow Knight, I think, but it's one of those games that occasionally can present a challenge that is so difficult that you almost just have to like walk away for a little bit and take a breather. For me, that breather has been probably over a year at this point, so I'm overdue to return to Hollow Knight anyways, and when I was looking at games that were on sale recently, Hollow Knight was one of them, although when it's regularly priced, still only $14.99, and I know that we have the sequel Silksong that's supposed to be coming out before too long, so I personally really need to jump on this title and go ahead and wrap it up. But again, if you're a fan of the Metroidvania genre and you don't mind one that's going to put up a pretty stiff challenge, Hollow Knight would definitely be worth investigating as one of the first titles you pick up for the Steam Deck. Now, moving up in price just a little bit to $19.99, you really can't beat a classic, and that is Resident Evil 4. Now, like I mentioned in a previous video, I love horror games in the portable format just because I feel like they represent a really intimate sort of horror experience that is perfectly well suited to like gaming out in bed before you go to sleep, assuming you're cool with those kind of nightmares being generated, I guess. And while Resident Evil 4 is not the scariest Resident Evil by any stretch of the imagination, it definitely was a refreshing point in the series and still one of the best around. Now, to be fair, I haven't mentioned a lot of PC exclusive titles on this list so far, and Resident Evil 4 might just be like the least PC exclusive thing that I could have mentioned here because you can play it just about anywhere, but nonetheless, I have actually played it on the Steam Deck and I can promise you it runs absolutely great there. No frame rate problems or anything like that, and even though it's a game that is definitely long in the tooth at this point, it remains enjoyable for a reason because great design will withstand the test of time, graphics aside, and Resident Evil 4 does exactly that. So if you're looking for a Resident Evil fix that, again, sort of had the refreshing over-the-shoulder take that we got when Resident Evil 4 kind of pioneered that look, it's going to play great, and you could do a lot worse for $19.99. Next up, also for $19.99, would be Yakuza 0. Now, I recommend this game if you're somebody who wants something that's more narrative heavy and provides sort of the thrill of exploring an open world, but without like the giant scale or the occasional mundanity of like, the sort of checklist approach to open world games that we see a lot. Yakuza 0 provides just a really great story. Now, speaking personally, I'm a little bit biased towards this title because I had just gotten done watching Tokyo Vice on HBO, which is absolutely incredible, by the way, and you should watch it. And after that was over, I knew I wanted more of exactly that, and I was like, you know what? I have barely touched the Yakuza series aside from Like a Dragon, but that was the most recent entry in the series. I had not played any of the prior ones, so I decided I would go ahead and pick up Yakuza 0 for the Steam Deck, and I have to say, it's been really great so far. I'm about 6 or 7 hours in at this point, and I'm having a really great time with it, despite the fact that it is not a fully open world or anything like that, and it certainly has like a more confined sort of structure to it in terms of how far you can explore. It is just absolutely packed with side activities to do, so when you're not actually progressing the main story and uncovering, just the seedy underground of the Yakuza in Japan, you can also just do tons of weird stuff on the side, right? Whether you want to, sing karaoke, if you want to go play with a claw machine at the local arcade, or play some Sega classics or something like that. There's just a whole lot of silliness in Yakuza 2, and that's one of the things that surprised me most about it. Is I was really into it most because I just want to see a good Yakuza story. But then beyond that, I kind of thought I would be really put off by a lot of the silliness in the side quests, because there's absolutely some over-the-top humor in this game. But the weird thing is even some of those side quests that come off initially as really silly, at their core, by the time you wrap up some of those quests, they actually have a lot of heart behind them too. So it really does pull off this really interesting balancing act between just, hardcore, like, crime, drama, action gameplay, and then also just, like, really silly side quest gameplay. So I like the fact that it doesn't take itself so seriously, but it's not willing to engage both. And as I understand it, after looking up some lists of like the best Yakuza games ranked, apparently this is one of the most highly ranked ones, which is weird because I think it's also one of the most recent releases. So it takes place in the 80s, and it does provide a very interesting story with a ton of colorful characters, so I won't say too much about it except for the fact that if you're looking to jump into the Yakuza series, as far as I know, again, as a relative newcomer to that series, 0 seems like a good place to start. But if you're somebody who prefers a more open world sort of crime simulator, you can't go wrong with Saints Row the Third, and it's only $9.99. Now, to be fair, at first I thought this was going to be $39.99 because there is a Saints Row the Third remastered, but I actually found that this was not supported on Steam Deck, and I did not go ahead and buy it. Now, I believe I have the remastered version on the Switch, but I'm just playing the regular Saints Row the Third on my Steam Deck right now, and I have to say, even though the graphics may not be quite as good as the remastered edition, it definitely runs butter smooth at like a constant 60 frames per second, so that's really, really nice. And if you've never played a Saints Row game before, the original one was almost like I guess it was trying to be like a copy of GTA, I guess you could say, and that kind of turned me off of the sequels, but then I came back to 3, just completely ignored 2, which maybe I should check that out sometime. But 3 is just over the top in every sense of the word. Like, the characters are over the top, the missions are over the top, the world is over the top. Like, if you like the humor that's on display in a GTA, Saints Row just takes that sense of humor and just ramps it up dramatically. Occasionally in an incredibly juvenile way, but if you're the kind of person who appreciates that sense of humor, as I am, then you will probably find a lot to love here. Not to mention, it is just fun to just drive around an open city and cause absolute chaos in Saints Row the Third, and it feels like there's a lot more fluidity to certain actions than you get from Grand Theft Auto. Things like stealing cars, where you can just sort of drop kick your way through the windshield to jack a car instead of going through just, a standard animation of pulling somebody out of the side. Just these weird little over-the-top touches make it a lot of fun to explore, and at $9.99, again, for the original version, not gonna break the bank. Alright, that's it. And really, I don't think there's ever going to be a huge shortage of affordable games on Steam, because they're constantly doing sales, and, the Steam Summer Sale's right around the corner, which I'm very excited about as a new Steam Deck owner. But hey, what about you? As somebody who is not overly familiar with PC gaming and has mostly been a console gamer, do you have any recommendations for someone who's a new Steam Deck owner on affordable games to check out that aren't going to break the bank? If so, let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear about it. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch these videos. It means a lot to me. Have an amazing day, and I'll see you on the next video. Bye.